The people who make decisions for Formula One racing have been getting a lot of complaints again, and for good reasons. During the race in Belgium, we saw some really bad choices that made famous racers like Verstappen and Hamilton totally mad. But what happens next for the FIA? And even more important, what's going on with the crazy rain that makes everything so hard for the race bosses? A long time ago, we got super excited to watch Formula One racing in the rain. Who wouldn't want that? Cars got all mixed up, drivers ended up in weird spots, and tiny mistakes cost the racers big time. But the sport has slowly started caring more and more about keeping everyone safe. And it looks like they've gone too far with how much safe is way too much safe. During the Belgium race, everyone knew Sunday was going to be rainy, so most teams changed their cars during the weekend. Verstappen got a wing that helps in turns, but makes his car slower on straight roads, meaning he would lose tons of speed just to keep up in the middle and fast corners. Perfect for rainy weather. The only thing that didn't work out was that the FIA waited for the rain to stop completely and the track to get dry before they let racing continue. We missed out on an awesome show that could have given us some really good racing and passing. But if you asked Verstappen and Hamilton, they thought the FIA's choice was totally wrong. Talking more about this, the four-time world champion said, "Well, stopping the start is kind of silly. I mean, you should just drive a few laps. Jesus, they are way too careful. Now the heavy rain is coming, and then it's going to be a 3-hour wait." They played it very safe, which we talked about after Silverstone, to be a little bit more careful. But for me, this was way too much the other way. It just ruined a nice old-school wet race, too. We either still try to push for a real wet Rati Chamard ace, or we say, you know what? Let's just stop racing in the wet and wait for it to be dry. But that's not what you want, right? We can still have some really cool wet racing, like we showed at Silverstone. It's not something we can't agree on. The drivers are literally made for weather like this. I'm not saying the race shouldn't have been stopped. We saw how much water was sitting on the track in the crazy heavy rain. Nobody who was thinking straight would have said to race in those conditions, especially not after losing 2 young lives in 2019 and 2023 in similar situations. But once the track started drying up, there was a chance for the drivers to go behind the safety car, make a dry racing line, and just go from there. Instead, the FIA waited for the rain to completely stop, for the track to be dry enough for the middle tires to work, and then sent the drivers out there. With no rain coming, it was obvious that we were going to see slick tires being put on soon after. And that really didn't help anybody who thought they were going to be racing in the rain. But what can be done here? The FIA is getting a lot of complaints for their actions when wet conditions become a big problem. And I think they have leaned a little bit more towards safety rather than the show. And this is where we need to talk about the bigger picture. What about the wet tires? Formula One literally has a set of tires that are meant to be used in conditions that showed up in Spa. So why not use them at all? Why not let the teams try and get better grip with these tires and avoid crashes? The problem is with how well these tires can clear water during testing. They made more spray because of how much water they moved, which is around 60 liters per second. So they are going to dry the track faster, but they're also going to make it even harder to see, which was the main reason why the track was delayed in the first place. Not to mention that the drivers would be much slower with them, which in Spa, under the rain, I don't think would have made that big of a difference. The drivers with the best skills would have been able to come through and show what they're made of. I understand it's fair to the drivers and the respect they have for their lives. But there comes a certain point where you have to ask yourself, is this really worth it? Is the FIA really able to organize a race under wet conditions? From this point of view, I don't think so. What I think is that we're going to see races only when the rain is not that big of a deal, or more exactly, when it's going to be medium wet, and not let the drivers literally slide their cars all over the track. And that's where the fun of the sport is lost, because even with the race restart, Hamilton was found to be very doubtful about why we had a rolling instead of a standing start. Talking more about this, the 7-time world champion said, "Definitely could have done a standing start, especially at the end there. It was almost a dry line. It was hot in the spray, so definitely could have done it." But it seems like not everybody was on the same side as Verstappen and Hamilton, starting with Leclerc. The Monaco driver said that he understands why the race bosses had to wait until 4:20 p.m. to officially start the race, because in this sport everything needs to be perfect. I kind of disagree with that because it takes away the excitement, but I'll leave Charles entitled to his own opinion, which I'm sure is shared by many F1 experts around the world. He is a proven race winner, not me. Talking more about this, Leclerc said, "I think it's always fine-tuning on a track like this with what happened in the past. I think you cannot forget about it. For that reason, I'd rather be safe than too early. It's a constant discussion, and we'll probably give feedback to the people that made this decision, and maybe it was a little bit on the late side, but I wouldn't have changed anything." The same side was taken by Oscar Piastri as well, who said that we shouldn't blame the FIA because they're the ones who were taking the feedback from the drivers and then using it with the race directors. So basically, if something's not fitting the drivers or what they want, then they should have a group discussion between themselves and not jump straight to conclusions or blame the governing body. Talking more about this, Piastri said, "I think the past few years, especially here in Spa, we've given the FIA feedback that we would much rather be on the safe side than risk anything. I think that's what we did today. If you were to be picky, maybe we could have done one less warm-up lap. But in the big picture, if that's one lap too early, is it worth it? No. Also, the three of us are the worst people to ask because we have the least number of cars in front of us. For someone at the back, the first time we tried to start the race, even for myself with just Lando ahead, I couldn't see a thing. You can only imagine what it's like for the guys at the back. And yes, that's worth remembering. The main reason why the race was stopped was not the lack of grip. That could have easily been solved with the tires for full wet conditions. It was the lack of being able to see, which I think would have been more or less better if the blue-striped tires were put on the cars as well. At the end of the day, we came out with a very weird result. Cars that had been prepared for wet weather racing in Spa ended up with a high downforce setup, low top speeds on the straights, and no ability to compete at all. Max Verstappen is probably the most hurt driver from this group, and after the sprint race, it was obvious that he was going to push for at least a top 3 finish here on his favorite track. He messed up his qualifying because of the car setup being made for Sunday, but it ended up going horribly wrong for him. And it's not even the team's fault this time. Could we blame the FIA for the race management for that? I think so. Yeah, if you're unable to organize a race under wet conditions, just throw away the wet tires that the teams already find no use for, and throw away the race from the calendar. Things have gotten to the point where even a little amount of rain, which was definitely not the case in Spa, is enough to cancel the show. Legends like Schumacher, Senna, Hamilton, and Verstappen were shaped in the rain. Just remember all of the Brazil races back in the day, especially 24 and 2008. That comes right to our minds. But I think as time moves forward, we're going to see less and less from these races and more artificially controlled races from behind closed doors. With all of this in mind, do you think that the FIA was right to stop the race for that long? And more importantly, what do you think the drivers could do to make sure that stuff like this won't happen again in the future? Let us know in the comments below. And once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.